Good morning and welcome to this forum, Social Media and Identities. My name is Stefan de Vries. I'm a journalist working here in Paris for Euronews and BBC Radio. And I'm very happy to welcome this wonderful panel this morning. We're not complete yet. A fourth person will join us a bit later in this discussion. I'm happy to welcome Shei Akiwowo. She's from Glitch, a non-for-profit organization in London, based in London, tackling online media and hatred and trying to make the internet a safer place, especially for women and young adults, but actually for everyone, I hope as well. Yeah, thank you. Next to her is Baroness Mary Goody. She's a Labour member of the House of Lords, or the House of Dames, actually, I should say, maybe. That's more interesting. She's also the founder of the 30% Club, an organization whose objective it is to get at least 30% of women in the boardrooms. I think 30% is not very ambitious. It's a target.
That was our start 9 years ago.
Could you take the microphone? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That was the milestone. We're now looking perhaps to go to 50-50. We're thinking about that.
Yeah, I think the world will be a better place.
And also,
absolutely.
it's not just the boardrooms, it's the pipeline, and also in NGOs and everywhere else we want to move it along.
Okay, thank you, Mary. And next to her, Rebecca Trumbull. She's an assistant professor at the Institute of Political Science at Leiden University, and she is working on many topics, amongst others, safety online, in collaboration with Twitter as well. Yes?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and we will be joined later by Eun Bai. I hope I pronounced it correctly. She's a Korean YouTuber, a South Korean YouTuber, I should say. But she will join us in about 15 minutes from now. Yeah, Shei, could you tell us a bit about your organization, Glitch? Because maybe not everybody knows this. I forgot one thing. You can participate in this debate with the application Bcast. You can ask questions, which we will answer or try to answer during this debate. So don't hesitate to ask anything you like or make a contribution. And of course, you can also tweet about this forum, and the hashtag is OECD Forum 2019. Is that correct? I think it is. Otherwise, OECD Forum. So don't hesitate. Please participate. So, sorry, Shei, your organization, Glitch, in London.
Thank you. So I was elected as the youngest black female councillor in East London at the age of 23. And that sparked quite a lot of media interest because the average UK councillor is 60 years old, white and male. So there was a huge interest in why somebody who looks like me was entering politics. And that meant I was afforded new opportunities and a platform to share perspective on topics that tend to be ignored when it comes to politics. Fast forward 9 months of getting elected, campaigning, and I was invited to the European Parliament in Strasbourg to talk about youth engagement and democracy. And this is where I made an impromptu speech in response to the awful things I was hearing from the young far right, the French Nationale, say about the Syrian refugee crisis. A video of that speech was posted on Facebook. It went viral within a few days. It was all positive, loads of media interest, loads of my followers increased, got the blue tick on Twitter. I thought Ellen was going to invite me to her show. Idris Elba was finally going to notice me. None of that happened. What happened was somebody put it on a neo-Nazi website and I was trolled for 2.5 weeks. I was sent racist abuse, death threats across all my media platforms. Not a year before was Joe Cox MP murdered, and because I was a councillor at the time, my address was public. So I had police officers come to my house, I had to make various statements, and that for me frustrated me because we are trying to push representation of women. We're trying to get 50-50 women in public life and engage in democracy, and this was what was beginning to be a glitch that was preventing me from doing my job. And so I set up Glitch in response to that, in supporting victims of online abuse, but also around holding social media companies to account and also pushing for government regulation. balancing freedom of expression, but making sure that everybody can be able to express ourselves. So we deliver workshops on digital citizenship, we deliver workshops on digital resilience for women in public life, and we do a lot of advocacy work. So we'll be responding to the government white paper that's coming out, it's out now, the deadline's in July, which is looking at online harms and how do we begin to address online harms from a regulation point of view, but also from an education point of view. And I'm really looking forward to having that discussion now on an international level, because I think there's best practice in the room that we can all share from.
Yeah, we will discuss that later. Yes, Baroness Mary, we shortly addressed it, the 30% Club. How is that going?
30% Club is going very well. As I mentioned earlier, that when we started, Helena Morrissey and myself started the 30% Club, which is not a charity, it's not a registered company, it is a campaign, a true campaign. And our campaign is to get representation in boards of 30%, because that's the number when it makes the change. At the same time, we've been working to get the executive pipeline altered. We've been working in education, a number of the business schools around the world where we have chapters. And the criteria to be a chapter for the 30% Club is a member of the G20. The reason for that is that the G20 countries come together and we can get our chapters to lobby them on the issues that affect women in the boardroom, and also lack of finance for women in startups and all of those issues. So the criteria to have a chapter in another part of the world is to be part of the G20, and we now have just launched our latest chapter, which is in Japan, and they were able to participate in the W20 and other issues. And in the United Kingdom, we're working, as I say, to get free scholarships, and in other universities around the world for MBAs for women to get a scholarship to go for a year. We're working with Speakers for Schools to get more women going, and men, because we believe it's men and women working together that can make this change, to encourage women from a very early stage that every door is open to them. So we're campaigning away and looking to the future of where we will be in another 5 years' time. Thank you.
And then it will be called the 55%
Well,
Club.
maybe.
Let's hope.
My success. We hope so. But we're continuing, despite everything to push us back, we're pushing forward, and we're working very closely with governments. And the British government have been very helpful. In America, we haven't got that help so much, but Bloomberg has been extremely helpful, and so on. I'd like to just say that, because without them, they have made huge difference for us and on other issues. Thank you.
Yes, Rebecca Trommel, you're from Leiden University in the Netherlands. Could you shortly explain what your work is exactly consisting of?
Shortly?
Very shortly, yeah.
I will be brief. So for years, I've been interested in how members of the public and politicians use social media to interact with one another. And I've particularly looked at the kind of uncivil or abusive interactions and how those impact the larger discourse, the larger political discourse. And at the moment, I'm leading a project that is beginning to help Twitter develop metrics in order to analyze some of these phenomenon on the platform. And this is not to identify them and then take them down, but rather to identify them so that we're better able to analyze the extent of negative and positive phenomenon on the platform and the overall effects on political discourse as they occur on Twitter, and then hopefully across social media more broadly.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now, the purpose of this debate is to talk about the challenges of the internet and social media. Of course, social media, it's in all our lives now has been already for almost, well, over a decade. It has led to many good things, but unfortunately also to quite some negative aspects. As we just heard, the example of Shei is, of course, well, very illustration of what can go wrong on social media. So the purpose of this debate is to talk about how we can tackle online hatred, but also how we can use the internet to, or social media, I must say, to promote equality and to protect vulnerable groups. So let's start with the first question. I don't know if you're aware, but last week here in Paris, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, and the French President Emmanuel Macron launched the so-called Christchurch call, a call for to tackle online hatred. A couple of governments, many big social media companies attended a summit last week here in Paris. They signed a non-binding agreement because it's a very difficult topic on which countries do not really agree, nor do the tech companies. Most of them are, of course, American. They have a different perception of the freedom of speech, but also about their role in society and the roles of government. So this Christchurch call was launched last week, of course, called after the horrible attack in Christchurch in New Zealand 2 months ago against the Muslim community. Now, there was a debate last week in France and more in general during this summit about the role of governments. The United States supports this call but didn't sign the agreement. Now let's ask a general question to our panel. How can social media platforms and governments work together effectively to tackle online hatred but also to provide this platform of free speech? Shei.
So I think it's really important to remember that the internet is neutral and that social media should in itself therefore be neutral, but actually it's not. Social media platforms have been designed and developed actually by a non-diverse group of people for a specific topic. And actually, if we remember, Facebook was originally designed for men to rate women. And so actually from its very crux, the very inception of social media there's been a glitch. But actually there's an opportunity here for all of us to start addressing it. And there's two things I want to talk about, a macro level and a micro level, as well as I'll do that. Macro level and micro level. On a macro level, we are seeing the rise of incels and negative belonging happening online. And actually, we saw an in real life attack happen in New Zealand.
You should just explain incels.
Incels is a group of lads who have a very negative, toxic opinion of women and their role in society. And what you'll see in a very macro level is organising against minorities, against marginalised communities. You also have online abuse on a micro level. So you have it, what's happening in schools, you've got it in bullying, you've got it to women, you know, political parties scoring points against each other. You've got two situations happening. And I think if you want to understand and start tackling online abuse, it's very important to understand the macro levels, the fake news, the bots being used to cause division amongst feminist movements or movements online, and also the micro level. Also, when we talk about online abuse, if we really want to tackle it, if we really want governments and social media companies to come together to tackle it, it must be intersectional. We can't understand online abuse to just be the things that affect white liberal women. We must understand that online abuse is hate speech, it's trolling, it's doxing, it's the showing of non-consensual photography, it's revenge porn. It's so much more than just online abuse. For the deaf communities, they face abuse through GIFs, through videos, through sign language. So it's really important that we understand online abuse and harms in its entirety. Otherwise, we're going to forget people. And then I think the biggest thing that social media companies and policymakers can decide today, if we want to do our own non-binding agreement, is to invest in digital citizenship education. Digital citizenship is just like citizenship, understanding that with every right comes responsibility. We have a right to be online. It's fantastic that the UN want to make sure every town and village has access to the broadband. That's great, but what are we doing to instill responsibility when we have that right? How we train up the next generation of young people, just because they know how to make the remote control work and do you a nice fancy PowerPoint slide, doesn't mean that they have the tools and the ability to be responsible. And so there needs to be investment in that, investment in how we can be an active bystander. 4 in 10 people in the UK and the US have experienced online abuse. That's 40%. And let's just say that those that are committing the abuse, spreading toxicity, causing division, make up 1%. Therefore, 59% of us, bystanders, are the majority. What are we doing to become active bystanders? What are we doing to take responsibility for what's happening on the platform? If we saw someone being catcalled outside, somebody being harassed outside, we have a knee-jerk reaction to want to call the police or intervene to do something. How do we start instilling that same behavior online? And it's really important that we're intersectional. We understand that 84% of black women experience online abuse. They're mentioned in problematic tweets. It's important that we understand that women are 27 times more likely to be harassed online. So yes, we should talk about ending online abuse and harms for everybody, but there are people who are disproportionately affected, and therefore we must hear their experiences too.
Thank you, Shea, and I'd like to welcome Young Bae from South Korea, a YouTuber. She just joined us. She is also a member of Escape the Corset, so we will talk with you in a minute. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's get back to Mary. We're talking about how governments and social media companies could or maybe should work together on tackling online hatred. But of course, there's a different point of view on the role of government. Let's take, for instance, the United States, where most tech companies are based, and on our side of the ocean, Europe. There's a big discrepancy on the view of the role of government between those parts of the world. What's your position? You're not in government, not yet at least, but you're a member of Parliament, the House of Lords, so you're pretty close to institutions, government institutions. What's your view on the role of governments in this issue?
There's many roles of government. First of all, we have to embrace social media, as my colleagues have said, because through social media, many campaigns, many issues have been raised. We've been also able about to inform people about what their benefits are, what their entitlements are. So there's many, many issues, and that's why we should embrace it. But at the same time, we have, as I call them, the guys under the bedclothes who don't get up and spend their whole day trolling and spitefulness, and also what's affecting the political situation in many countries around elections and these ads. There's one way, and I saw that two of the big investors into Twitter this week have announced that they are going to be watching how Twitter deals with abuse online, and that they must start taking it down immediately. And I also have been listened to when he gave evidence to the Westminster Parliament. Mark Zuckerberg took some dealings to get him to come, but he came, and I gather he was in Paris this week. I think it's difficult for governments to regulate because it takes a while to get regulation through. But I think we should call on the platforms to self-regulate, as we've managed to get newspapers in some cases and television channels to self-regulate. Not in America so much, but in Europe. And I think that would be the first point. First, to call on the investors into the social media groups to put pressure on them, because we know from other campaigns through an organisation I've worked with called Share Action, where we've put pressure to have the gender pay gap, to have more women on boards, and to treat disability and to have a proportion of disabled people working throughout companies. So I think the shareholders are really key to making a difference to these platforms along with government. And if you have these two campaigns working side by side, we can make a difference. But the real problem is we need to make this difference today, not tomorrow or the day after, because otherwise we're going to see more issues like the situation of Joe Cox and other members of Parliament in my country and other individuals being put off doing what they're doing. But worse still is that young people will not want to go into Parliament, will not want to join NGOs that are doing active lobbying activities on real issues. So that is why we have to try and push the action ourselves, along with the other work that other NGOs are doing. And this is where the research that you're doing and where the press comes into it. So it's really important that we keep raising the issues, because people who are doing this are of an extreme, they don't want to hear about this. They're scared of what we're doing. They're scared of change.
But what if these companies refuse to address themselves the issue? Because, of course, Facebook is very powerful. I think you can turn off television and nobody will notice. But if you turn off Facebook, then you will have a revolution tomorrow. What can you do to put pressure, apart from the action shareholders?
Well, this is where the shareholders have to take the action, and they can take action. And we've seen them take action on other issues. We've seen companies damaged and destroyed because of shareholder action. And at the same time, governments have to then take the courage to take legislation in a much faster, the fast stream, to stop this happening, because the situation around suicide, and to have platforms to teach people how to commit suicide and to self-harm, that's not normal. You know, shouldn't be a daily business, and that's what these people are making it into. As I say, we have to really take action.
Okay. Rebecca Trommel, as a scientific, what's your point of view on this complicated matter?
Well, so my perspective is that we're at a critical juncture at the moment. We have the attention of the companies themselves. We have the attention of many policymakers. It's time to actually hear directly from the people who are standing from the outside but experiencing this. So the sort of work that Glitch is doing, I think, is absolutely fundamental to getting this right, both from the policymakers and the companies' perspectives. But I also think that it's essential. Of course, I am an academic. I think it's essential that we bring independent researchers and their knowledge to bear at this critical moment, because we have truly thousands of experts who are operating all around the world, not just in Western democracies, but truly all around the world, who are gathering the knowledge, who understand the experiences, and yet their knowledge, their insights are not being fundamentally integrated into either the policy work or the company's solutions for these, right? We have on both sides, within the companies, a lot of well-intentioned engineers who have very limited experiences based on their training. Again, incredibly well-intentioned. They want to do right with their platforms and in the world, but we're not integrating core social scientific humanities understanding of what individual and social implications are for the technology that we're building. And even as we're trying to design solutions, those are mostly focused on the technical engineering design questions, where if we bring in richer insight from those who have directly experienced this, as well as those who are studying it, I think that we can reach solutions that are much more effective, much more quickly.
I have an interesting question from one of the people here in the room on Bcast. A philosophical question, actually. Have social networks become the dark side of the individual in the 21st century?
I think that's true, and I think that's true. And today, at some point, Gordon Brown is making a speech in London about the dark side around political advertising and about how money and dirty money comes in to influence political elections. And I'm not sure what time he's making it, but it's being trailed last night and this morning. So it'll be interesting what he says, and I hope that other politicians or other people will come on the back of this.
Shei, you seem to disagree.
No, I don't. Social media and internet is neutral. It's people who make it negative. It's people who are bad. And actually, the internet and online technologies are only just replicating and maybe to some extent exacerbating existing inequalities we're seeing in society. So when that research came out by Amnesty International, which showed that black women were 84% more likely to be mentioned in problematic and abusive tweets, or that women on Twitter every 30 seconds faced abuse, women and black people are like, yeah, we told you this 10 years ago. You're not listening, you're not catching up. So this has been a problem for a long time. The reason why we're at this crux that you mentioned is because it's now affecting the liberal elite. It's now affecting campaigns. It's now affecting democracy, which is very important. We should do something about it because it is a threat to our democracy. But it's been an issue that's been bubbling for a very, very long time. And that's why we need to be intersectional. And your point about multi groups coming together is so key. Canada are doing this. I don't know if there's any Canadians in the room. Hey.
There's always a Canadian in the room.
Hey.
They're the Liberal Party.
The Canadians here, the Canadians are the ones that I think are leading the way, closely followed by Australia. Canada have a lab where they've got academics, policymakers, civil society groups working together in the same room. I know, like mind blowing, right? But hugely common sense as well. And they're the ones that were leading the way on the treaty in the United Nations Human Rights Council last year that I was speaking on. They're the ones that are looking at international framework, because you've got every single party, every single stakeholder represented there. And that, I truly believe, is how we're going to start seeing the solutions.
Let's go to our Korean guest, Eung Bae, better known as Lina Bae from YouTube. Now, you used to spend 2 hours a day putting on makeup, making, because a lot of girls in your country are afraid to go on the streets without makeup. Then you made a video. You decided not to put on makeup, made a video, I'm Not Pretty. And then you became more or less, well, pretty well known, right? What exactly, how were you confronted with online hatred, and what was your answer against these online hatreds?
제가 그 영상을 올리고 나서 굉장히 많은 칭찬과 그리고 굉장히 많은 악플들이 달렸었어요. 그래서 생각보다 정도가 심한 메일로
When I uploaded things, I got a very positive reaction, but I also got a very negative reaction. Things went wildly beyond my expectations. I got some very violently negative feedback on the video that I put online. People misused my content to portray my message in a negative light. But on the other hand, thanks to the online space, I was able to share my ideas with a very wide audience. So you should take into account the good and the bad of what I did. But I asked myself the question, do I really need to go through all of this to get my message across? Do I deserve to suffer in this way? I don't believe that social media platforms are bad inherently. I think it is the use that is made of them that can become bad. And I really believe that we need to think about the underlying issues. Understand why some people are pushing other people to hate online. We really need to have a wide public debate on social media. And when I got that very negative, violent feedback, I actually went to the police station, first of all. And at the police station, I was told that it was very difficult to track down the perpetrators online, these violent people sending these violent messages. But I said that I wanted to make these people responsible for what they were doing online. The policeman at the station asked me the question, did you maybe upload content that men didn't like? And they were turning the situation on its head. I was all of a sudden the reason for what was happening to me. They were asking me whether I was responsible for the reaction that I had suffered from.
You for your reaction, or how people reacted to you. Is that also maybe symbolic for how many countries are tackling online hatred today, or maybe even, to put it larger, rape victims are not taken seriously either by authorities? Is that also part of your fight, that authorities become aware of the issues and the problems that you can face online?
네, 그렇습니다. 그리고
Yes, exactly. That is part of my fight. It's important that authorities understand that there are real victims of what's going on online. Recently in Korea, there was a rape-related scandal. It was nationwide. It was these hidden cameras that film rape scenes of young children, of school children. And the courts ended up only arresting the people that had actually raised the alarm about the problem. But the victims didn't receive any form of justice. Given what had happened, we raised our voices against this unfair legal decision, because these hidden cameras are a quite widespread phenomenon online. These cameras are all over the place. people are filming their friends, their colleagues. And for example, guys will film their girlfriends and then put the videos online if they break up. And then people pretend that they didn't know that anything was going on. And the police pretend that nothing's really happening. And even if they catch them, the punishment does not fit the crime. And after these kind of tragedies, some women become suicidal. Women can no longer find the strength in them to continue to live. We recently had a celebrity in Korea who got involved. There was a lot of online traffic related to this celebrity online. She was the #1 search term in Korea for a while because there were videos, violent videos of her that were put online. I think that everyone needs to unite to find some kind of solution to this terrible phenomenon that really damages women's mental health.
As well, of course, a lot of people harassing online, they hide themselves behind fake names or fake accounts even. That means that anonymity is an issue online. Can we consider it an option to end online being anonymous online, or is that not an option we should address? Mary, maybe.
It's a difficult issue because you then go down the road of freedom of speech. We go down the road of freedom of speech. So then do we look at it in a different way? Do we look at it as a crime? So we would fine people, or whether people would be sent to prison if they make somebody commit suicide or certain other things that happen. So it is a very difficult and a fine line between how you deal with this, between freedom of speech, which we all believe in, but at the same time maybe taking criminal legislation on fining, but not only fining the person who does this, but fining the internet company as well. So then there would be more care about what happens on in the space. I'm not sure how others would feel about that, but I really feel that we don't take it off. We have, the internet companies have to have a way of not letting it necessarily stay on very long, and fines and imprisonment if necessary.
Rebecca?
So just taking this from a very practical perspective, setting aside the philosophical issues, which are of course important, but setting aside the questions of free speech, from a practical perspective, we're never going to end online anonymity. The technology, the tools will always adapt in ways that allow people to remain anonymous. Now, there are all sorts of countermeasures that can be put in place for those who are using anonymity to enact abuse, harassment. What really needs to be developed further are the regulatory perspectives, criminal law and such need to be developed further to recognize that the harms of online abuse and harassment are as real as offline abuse and harassment. The sort of stalking, things that we call dogpiling, for example, right? They're coordinated efforts at harassment of individuals or groups. These have as many real-world implications, creating true mental health issues, physical safety issues. We have to take these as seriously from a legal perspective, right, as we do on offline behavior. And in fact, we need to take offline behavior, right, even more seriously as well. But we simply have to recognize in the first place that the online abuse and harassment has the same consequences as it does offline.
She, when you were attacked 3 years ago, were there a lot of anonymous harassers as well? And how did you react against them?
Yeah, so there were definitely people who were anonymous, hiding behind pseudonyms. And at that point in time, I was like, get them all down. Everyone should be who they are, full name, middle name, your dad's name, everyone's name should be on social media. I want to know who you are. And it's through 2 years of becoming, I guess, now an expert in tech-related violence that I agree with Rebecca that being anonymous is not going to solve the issue. And actually, anonymity, that word I can never say, actually is a lifeline to people in places like the global south who need to be anonymous because they're doing freedom work to try and get civil liberties taken seriously in their country. And actually, talking about anonymity, as you can see, I still struggle to say it, is a distraction from what's actually happening, because there's people who are very much themselves on social media who spread hate speech, who spread abuse, and they don't get taken down either. I think there's a really key point here that we're talking about access to justice. And I think that's where government and policymakers could also focus their time. I know that I was in a very much a privileged position, being a local politician, that I could be taken seriously by the police and that I could have my case be taken up by detectives. But not every black woman or every black man has a comfortable relationship with the police. Not every woman is believed by the police for offline violence as well as online violence. And so there needs to be consistent training and support for our police services, particularly in the UK, where we're seeing massive cuts to the police services. There is no time for police to start learning IP addresses and tracking them down. It's time spent that could be spent on other areas of law, which I totally understand. It's also important to understand that online abuse isn't just criminal, it's also civil. It's defamation. It's trying to, when you Google your name, when the first 2 pages of the search results being things like being fake stories, being fake news, to try and make it difficult for you to stand in public life or for you to get a job. That's not criminal. It's civil, and it still hurts. And I think it's really important that policy takes into account how it can improve access to justice, how social media companies should also have a duty of care. So we look at Germany. Germany last year really enforced its new legislation on fining social media companies up to 500 million euros if they do not take down clear hate speech online. Now, there was a huge kind of uproar from the freedom of expression groups that, is this going to curtail freedom of expression? Is this going to be Big Brother watch? But it looks like evidence is showing that they've managed to carefully find the balance. Because it's true, there are some things that are just clearly hate speech, some things that are clearly harmful. And there's a lot of like backlog, that, you know, clearly things that are violating the red line. There are some things that are grey and that are murky, and that's where we need to get academics in, and we need to look at AI and other things like that. I totally get that. But there's some things that are clearly hate speech that is still not being taken down by social media companies. And so one thing that I think they could do is there should be a levy. There should be a levy on all companies. I think they should pay, well, in the UK, there's a discussion about a tax, a digital tax. And we're campaigning for 1% of that. So £4 million every year to be spent on education, enforcement, and empowering, because civil society groups are the experts. They're the ones that are providing frontline services. They're the ones that are doing helplines and national stalking helplines and providing legal aid for women who are trying to get some access to justice. But they're heavily, heavily under-resourced and having to fight for the same pot of money as someone who's trying to tackle domestic violence, as someone who's trying to tackle child pornography or child sexual exploitation. We shouldn't be competing. We should have more money for this new crime. And there should be, this levy should be used to help enforce legislation, because police teams, they want to protect society, they want to protect the public, but they have no training and they're not supported. I wouldn't want to be a moderator. Not at all. The amount of harm that they see every single day, that would mess with my head. And so how are we making sure that our police teams are also properly given safeguarding training to make sure that they're not impacted by what is happening?
Lina, is anonymity in the South Korean cyberspace also an issue? And if yes, how is the South Korean government tackling it, or NGOs in your country, the issue of people hiding behind fake names and accounts in order to harass people?
한국에서는 다른 외국에서는 모르겠는데 한국에서는 모욕죄라는 게 있어요. 사이버 범죄 수사팀도 있고요.
I don't know how things are in other countries, but in South Korea, we do have a crime. Defamation is a crime in Korea. But even despite having that as a crime, we are unable to regulate online defamation. You could bring together all sorts of evidence. You can bring hard, solid proof that you have been the victim of online attacks, that you've been the target of hate speech, but actually nothing gets done. It seems that people aren't necessarily aware of the huge negative impact that this kind of thing can have on people's mental health. I believe that we need more studies into this topic to strengthen the legal provisions so that we can truly punish the people who are doing this. And social media companies also should get involved and take on their share of the responsibility. For example, as you said earlier, it's very easy to create a fake account. It's also very easy to create an account with someone else's name and then to express yourself in any way you want, and we need to make sure that's regulated too.
I have an interesting remark from somebody in the audience. And individuals can feel detached and anonymous online, enabling comments and actions they would never make in person. How can you enable empathy and emotional feeling online? That's an interesting question. Who first? Rebecca.
So there are a number of different techniques to aid in this. One thing I think that research so far suggests is that we need to make it clear that people are speaking to and with other real people. And there are ways that you can structure comments back and forth, discussion sections on social media platforms that provide those signals in a stronger way. Things like changing the icons, the pictures that are used for people, to have particular standards. Not necessarily that you have to use, your own face and your own identity, but there are ways that those can be reconfigured to communicate to people a sense that you're actually engaging with someone who's real behind that computer screen. The way that you might structure the true back and forth. Moderation is always a way to improve and to guide towards empathy, but at scale, moderation isn't terribly practical. So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is how we not necessarily break up the companies, but take the larger spaces that they've created and generate spaces that are smaller scale, right, within the larger platform, smaller scale spaces that can be more actively moderated by people who are part of the community themselves and who take responsibility for aiding that discussion, right, without censorship, without a heavy hand, but bringing in the elements that really do help guide people towards empathy with one another.
Yeah, Mary?
I think also people forget that because they're doing it on the internet, they don't realize they're talking to people, because you wouldn't talk to a person the way, well, I would hope not by some people, the way that they talk to people on the internet, because they think they're not talking to anybody in particular, except some of the groups know well what they're doing. And I think that much more could be done in terms of what we were talking about earlier, education for young people in schools about how you behave on the internet. That's not going to help the present situation just now, but it will go towards helping that. And I think more education is important around use and language, and also, as you were saying, about anonymity, about certain signs and certain things that I see on Twitter and on one or two others make me know before you even look at what they're saying that this is something that's not safe. You can tell, or if something's coming to you and you look where it is and you think, they're under the bedclothes, yes. So we need to look at all of that. And these companies can do that very quickly. They know how to do it. They know this is going to be coming. So they're already working on it, I'm sure.
Shei?
I really love your point around getting people to remember that they're talking to a human being. So we deliver digital citizenship workshops, and we deliver it to 3,500 young people. 100 of them actually were in France, in Strasbourg. And our initial findings have shown that through a discussion about digital citizenship, that you have a responsibility, that your words have impact, that you have to be responsible for your actions, and that also about being an active bystander online, that we were having an impact, that 86% of young people were saying, I now realize that I am a little bit responsible for the well-being of other people online. 40% now said that they would intervene if they saw somebody being bullied. And actually what it is just opening a dialogue in schools, in youth groups, wherever young people are, adults too actually, libraries, workplaces, to have a conversation to remind ourselves that the internet is an extension of our public space. The narrative needs to change when we talk about the internet. It's not a faraway place, it's not Jupiter, it's here and now. It's an extension of our public spaces, so we need to make sure we start seeing it's governed that way. And I think it's important that employers and brands also have a conversation. It's all well and good Nike, Adidas using people like Serena Williams and Colin Kaepernick for their campaigns, but when they're faced with hate speech on their platforms, they're nowhere to be seen to take some of that stuff down. Brands can also help enforce digital citizenship and saying, look, this is not how we talk online. And I love your point about localizing the internet, because if you look at Facebook, 2.3 billion monthly active users. That's 3 times the population of Europe. Yet it has no democratically elected governance structure, no emergency services. How do we start breaking that up? How do we as citizens start holding these companies to account the same way we would member states?
Rebecca, you would like something to add?
Yes, I just wanted to very quickly drive home the point about the importance of the bystander. This is something that you've mentioned a couple of times. And from an academic research perspective, we have so much strong evidence that suggests interventions by someone who's outside observing this, right, formulated properly, not attacking interventions, but an intervention to step in and say, maybe essentially think about what you're doing here. This isn't appropriate. That then brings further bystanders to the discussion and very quickly shuts down the toxic behavior. So training and actually encouragement within the platform itself to bring bystanders. And if everyone in this room actually right now took upon themselves the individual responsibility to act as a helpful bystander when you're witnessing problematic interactions online, right now we could make an impact.
And then, I just want to say there are 5 things that we recommend that you can do. Number 1, report the abuse to the social media companies. A lot of people just scroll away and say, oh, that was awkward. Oh, I wish I wasn't her. If you help report it, then it gets flagged up to these companies. The second thing you can do is reply to the post as originally intended. A lot of what happens is derailment and manipulation, and you forget the whole point of that of the post. So, for example, when somebody uses the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and then someone brings it along and says, are you saying that other people's lives don't matter? And you now end up getting a conversation about what that post wasn't even about, or hashtag me too, and someone derails it. Actually help reply to the post as originally intended. Number 3, send an encouraging message. Suicide rates are on the rise. Self-harm is on the rise because of online abuse. Because look at Malaysia. Last weekend, a young girl used Instagram stories to do a poll. Should I commit suicide today? Yes or no? 62% of the people said yes, she took her life. What if somebody, one of us was there to say, we love you, we support you, you're amazing, you're encouraging. Your encouragement could save a life. I could not have made it through that horrendous experience. I had people talking about what they wanted to do with my body parts, about exterminating me. I could not have made it through if it wasn't for that being over-flooded by support and kindness of strangers, people who I'd never met, who I'm probably never going to meet, saying that they stand in solidarity with me. It helped me see that I wasn't alone. The 4th thing that you can do is encourage them to document and report the abuse. Just like offline abuse and harassment that is underreported, so is online abuse. So we need to start charging to the police station, start flooding them with evidence so they can start tracking the patterns of what is going on. I recommend taking a screenshot of what happened, file it in a folder, keep a simple table, the resources on our website, a simple table with the date, the time, and the website where it took place, and most importantly, the impact it made you feel. Because going back to Rebecca's point, the law around online abuse is actually really poor, because a lot of the burden's on the victim to prove that calling me the N-word, saying that you hate me and you want to kill me, hurt my feelings. And then the final thing is send a resource. It could be around mental health, it could be around self-care, it can be a resource on our website. It can be a cat meme, it can be a video, just help, it's distraction tools, right? Just help them not get focused and bogged down. I had friends send me a self-care box. I had a friend send me pictures of Idris Elba because I love him. And it helped, it really does help, but those are just there's just many of the things that you can do literally to save a life, to save our democracy today.
I remember a report by the Belgian public television about a year ago where a TV show picked hatred speech or comments on Facebook that people posted under their real names, and then they went to see those people, ring at the door, and they confronted them with those what they said online. And all these people, without any exception, were normal people, but most importantly, they were very embarrassed, and they were asked to repeat what they had posted online, and nobody dared to do so. How is it possible that that people turn, or some people turn into monsters once they're online, and how can we prevent them from becoming such horrible persons behind their computers?
Because that's what they really feel in some ways, and some of this stuff that's going on encourages people to do this, and they think they can get away with it in the way that they go at women and girls and at public figures. And also, they don't do it just in their own countries, they do it in other countries. Yeah. They campaign together to try to bring particular groups down or particular people down. And we're going to see more of that, unfortunately, I think, in the next 12 months around some of the elections that are coming up in Europe and in other parts of the world.
And the next week, actually.
Yes, and next week. We're seeing it on Thursday in the United Kingdom on the European elections, and it's got really bad there. And but trying to persuade people and their offices or themselves to report it rather than telling me or telling our respective friends is that it's really important that it's reported, because the more it's reported, the more the numbers go up. And I really feel that.
The internet, though, and the screen, I don't think it's any different from road rage. Who here suffers from road rage? In London, mate, it's insane. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've become a completely different person. So I would love to hear if there's any like science behind this, because I do think there's something about as soon as you have that screen, that tablet, that mobile phone, that you become desensitized. You're in a vehicle, you think you're in a safe space, or someone cuts you off, you think you can say a swear word or something like that. But yet, if they came out of the car, you'd be like, whoa, that weren't me. I didn't swear. That wasn't my middle finger. That was my ring finger. You know, when we're confronted with actually being in front of something or somebody, we change. But I don't think this is different from the internet. This is something that we can learn actually from road rage and other areas and other places.
So this is one area where there is a great deal of research, fantastic cognitive and social psychology research that really shows us the effects of a sense of distance created by sitting behind the computer screen or the phone or whatever it is, and that has real effects in terms of how we interact with people. While I agree that the kind of overall dynamic is similar to road rage, right? In that you have this sense of space and safety created by it. What's different about the online and particularly social media space is that it is largely performative.
Yes.
Right? It's not, you're not just doing this for yourself, right? And to get that angry feeling out, you're also performing for others on social media. And we currently have so many platforms that directly reward the hot take, right? The fast action, the horrible, snarky remarks to one another, the flaming. People get a sense of reward from others online. And this is again where we come back to the role and the importance of the bystander. In that performative moment, people need to not feel the glory, right, of that. They need to feel the shame in it.
Lina, were you able to confront people that harassed you online in real life and then discover that they were actually completely normal persons? Have you had engagements with the people who were attacking you online in the real life?
저는 만나본 적이 딱 한 분 계시는데요. 좀 저런 우연히 만난 거였어요. 저 지나가다가 저희 집 근처였는데 저랑 눈이 딱.
There was one case where I met someone online, and it was quite by chance. We just crossed paths in a corridor, and it was someone who wanted to know where I lived. They wanted to know my address. And we ended up talking, and we discussed my YouTube site. This person insulted me face to face. I was completely paralyzed. There was nothing that I could think to do or say. I ended up just going home without saying anything. I was terrified because this was a physical person who was trying to get my address. Someone who was going to continue to spread fake information, hateful information about me online. I was terrified. It was like, for that person, it was just entertainment, because I had no worth in their eyes. These attacks have continued online because my content online is still there. The number of dislikes is much higher than the number of likes. So people are still giving negative feedback, negative comments, and it's fun for them. They enjoy attacking me. They enjoy putting negative comments online. And it's always the same thing, the same pattern that you see time after time. And it's only anonymity that enables these people to work like this, to do this. They wear a mask. They're hiding behind a mask, and they turn into someone who's different from myself, not a human being. And that's when the worst things emerge. And I really think we need to be vigilant about this.
Of the audience, what is the actual tendency of online reacting versus an online attack? Do we observe a growing tendency to react and defend the victims, or is there no change on behavior throughout the years? So what are the trends actually? Are more people being harassed and then attacked in real life, or is there a real shift in attitude and perception that actually more victims are being defended by people online?
It's a bit difficult to tell at this point, to answer that very clearly, because we actually don't have a good track record of overtime research on this. It's something that we have become much more aware of in recent years for precisely the reasons that we've been discussing throughout today. And so it's difficult to say what the trends are. What we really need now, though, are good systematic analyses to understand where it's happening, why it's happening, what are the types of topics, the types of dynamics, though who are the people who are being abused, and what are the justifications that are being used for this. While I can't say what the trends are, what I can say is there's too much abuse and harassment, and there's too little positive bystander intervention. We can always work to decrease the former and improve the latter.
Do you have any statistics on how many people actually go from online to real life to act on their hatreds?
Here again, we don't have really good statistics on this. The fact that we're kind of late to the game now, recognizing that the online abuse can have offline consequences, means that we're just not caught up in understanding how they truly move from one to the other.
Okay, thank you.
I was just trying to Google the stat that the Home Office in the UK released 3 weeks ago. So I don't want to do fake news and misquote you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to find it. I'm going to tweet it with a hashtag that you're going to know what the actual truth is. But there was a significant number of terrorist attacks in the UK that started with it being online. Let's just say it was 8 out of 10 of the terrorist attacks started and was motivated or was groomed or whatever, had an online element to it. And if we again look at New Zealand, and I think New Zealand is such a sad case, but it's a case to show actually where so many failures happened, right? You've got the grooming happening online and this conversation happening on these websites, and why wasn't those languages those language and those words picked up? Then you had the actual person go ahead and say, I'm going to do it. So they were activated and groomed. Then you had the person do the attack and film it live stream on Facebook. Why did it take more than 12 minutes for that content to be taken down? Then you saw people was watching this content and nobody reported it. So there was lack of active bystander there. Then you had that video being shared across YouTube, and YouTube kept saying, we don't know how to take it down. So their platform, the robot now has basically surpassed the master. So there is such a sad case of the online becoming the offline, but also where there were so many places where we could have interjected and had intervention that it didn't have to be as bad.
But in that case, who could have interrupted this process? Government institutions, the social media platforms themselves?
Well, there's a conversation happening now in the UK with the online harms white paper to have these conversations itself. Should this regulator, whether it's something like an Ofcom or something, be able to turn off the social media platform or the internet platform or the provider if, where like YouTube, wasn't able to take down that video straight away? But I think it's also about positive belonging. Everybody here, whether you're trying to say you don't, but I believe everybody here wants to belong, wants to feel seen and heard and valued. And actually, if we begin tackling that offline and online, you wouldn't need such huge regulation. What we're doing is having regulation to do with the backlog, but we actually also need to start being proactive and think long term. And that's why I love Rebecca's point about longitudinal research to show the effects. Something that's also been missing from this debate when we're talking about a new social contract and we're looking at social media and identity is the addictiveness of these platforms.
Yeah.
It's the impact it's having on mental health. I was on a panel with Dr. Linda Papadopoulos. She's dope. And she was talking about the impact of being online so much on our generation. It means that our memory will be worse than 65-plus-year-olds. And that we're starting to lose the synapses in our brains because the way the platforms are being run. So you've got platforms that are inherently designed, and the matrix is about time spent. It's not really about ads. It's not really about profits. The way their matrix, their biggest matrix, about time spent. Are you spending 10 minutes? That's why on YouTube, it takes 10 seconds for the next video to load. They want you to stay online. So if you've got 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds that are loving this new world because all their friends are on it and it's great, and they're being literally told and forced to stay online, how are they making informed decisions? How are they saying, actually, I want to take a detox from this? Because actually, any good thing overused becomes a bad thing. And I think actually this social contract that we're talking about, I love that idea. I think that's where digital citizenship comes in. We also need to look at how these platforms are designed to literally have you locked in from an early age to keep on these platforms. Then you have algorithms that expose you to content that create echo chamber. So if you look at what's happened with YouTube in the UK, you can listen to grime music, you can listen to urban music, street music. I'm not sure what the equivalent would be for different countries. And then the algorithms will work to the point where you're now looking at videos and music that's about murdering other people. Same thing, you could be watching something about animal cruelty, something from PETA, and the algorithms will work where you're now watching a video where there's some conspiracy theory telling you that kosher food and halal food is the way it's produced is wrong, and then you start getting engaged into the grooming of anti-Semitism and the far right. And that's why we're also seeing this huge rise in anti-Semitism too, with this conspiracy theory. And again, algorithms have a part to play in this too.
There's a question from the audience that relates to this and which interests me as a journalist. We see that behavioral nudges and design are used to encourage social media use and the spread of posts. Everybody probably knows this, but if you put on a post with 10 ways to make your cat look like Elvis Presley, then probably you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of clicks. But when you put on a post how to explain the European Parliament, nobody will click. I see that in my environment as a journalist, that a lot of journalists and media are training the journalists to, even in collaboration with the likes of Google, to write headlines that will attract clicks. That's the only thing that matters. Now, are there examples of, that's actually the question of the audience, are there examples of regulation and approaches that actually use this kind of behavioral tactics to promote, well, positive action or inform people on the consequences of their posting before they click on 10 ways how to make your cat do funny things?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that's being done on positive nudging in online spaces now, which I think is a very positive development overall. I want to really quickly say that one of the things we're observing in recent research is that fewer people are now clicking on clickbait headlines. That in fact, it seems to some extent there's been such an oversaturation of clickbait that people are so weary of it that now more staid, responsible, traditional journalistic headlines.
So there's hope for journalists like
There
me.
seems to be
Okay, I'm
some,
not doomed.
there seems
Okay.
to be some hope, but right, that's a part of how we think about how we use these larger nudges. We need to not rely on oversaturation of the negative so that people just get weary, but a focus on the positive encouragement, a reminder that here is what's true, and we present that before what's false, right? Not just highlighting the false or the negative, but highlighting the truth and the positive before we then inform people of what the negative is. And there are all sorts of different mechanisms that can be implemented in the design of social media and online platforms that help put the positive and the truth before the elements that actually might get people to engage the negative. So you can entice them because those, those what we think of as more negative elements are there, but by foregrounding the positive and the truth, you actually create a more positive response overall.
So you're already seeing this trend.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, isn't that also a topic that should be addressed in schools, in education?
Absolutely, it has
Mary.
to be.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
It has to be addressed in schools, and it should be part of schools' curriculum. It's really, really important. And also not just at secondary level, it must be in primary level from the very beginning. Because we know in schools that children from 4 and 5 sometimes make a decision about what they're going to be in later life because of the first person who's kind to them. And that helps to build up a presence. So in the same way about social media, they still need to start learning about that when they come into school. Otherwise, they'll get the wrong end of the whole thing. And also about not staying on it all the time, and parents have to really understand that, and guardians of children, because this is a real problem in the United Kingdom at the moment, that children are on it too long, and the House of Lords Committee on Media has been looking into this and taking evidence.
She
Definitely believe that this should be in the curriculum. Definitely believe this should be embedded in sexual relationship education, how to have a healthy relationship with people, but it can't be delivered by teachers. Teachers are under so much stress as it is. They've got so much to do, and there's a generation gap. I see it. I'm in school. I think I'm cool. I think I'm young, turning 28 in August, talking to 16, 15, 14-year-olds. They think I am old. There is such a disconnect in only 12 years. I can't imagine for teachers trying to keep up with all the apps. So this is where empowering civil society groups is important, because they're the experts. They can be creative. They can base workshops on the humans, so it's human-centered design. And also, when it comes to social media, you're not going to really want to listen to your adults, the teachers, your parents about don't use a platform. You just think, oh, my mum's just trying to stop me from having fun. When you can have somebody who's relatable, a role model who can talk about the impact it's having, the young people will listen. So yes, we should have the curriculum so we make sure it's consistent across the UK. And I'm really looking forward to having a conversation about how we can make sure there's some consistency amongst the 36 countries, because the internet is borderless. And so people who are doing the abuse don't just stay in the UK. Oh, you've got a postcode that is like France, I can't abuse you. They don't care about that. So it's important that we have role models who can keep it real and make it relatable for young people. Otherwise, we're just spending money on another curriculum, another topic, another PowerPoint slide that's not going to be effective.
Lena, how is it in Korea? Because South Korea, sorry, it is of course one of the I think in the OECD ratings and PISA ratings, one of the best education systems in the world, but it's also where the stress is the highest, if I understand correctly. How is education playing its role in South Korea when it comes to online awareness or media literacy? Is there any space for those topics in the curriculum of South Korean schools and universities?
제가 사이버에 대한 그런 교육은 하지 않는 걸로 알고 있어요. 제가
About cyber activities, digital activities, we don't have particular education program, but Korean pupils or students are very worried about going to university to buy higher education, and in fact, they're not interested in digital awareness raising or programs, because our education is really rote learning, and they focus on universities and university education. So I'm not very positive about introducing that in the curriculum at primary or secondary education. I think somebody has to do something about it, show the culture, the environment, show the extremely serious cases. But unfortunately, Korean students or pupils don't believe their parents. They're very self-centered, and they don't believe what adults believe. I think everybody should have the right to his or her own opinion, but to change our young people, I think we would need campaigns or or things done by the influential people.
Debating is rather negative, sometimes even depressing. What's the upside of social media? How can social media be used in a good way? Because of course it's not only dark and negative. There's also a very positive side. Well, I hope there is in politics. Maybe you can start, Mary.
I see social media, as I said in the very beginning, as a wonderful tool to explain what's going on, to bring forth in a cultural way about new films, about music, about events happening locally, how to get to places, about opening up campaigns, good campaigns, campaigns for benefits, campaigns for your local community center, campaigns more globally, campaigns on climate change, on the whole problem of climate change making people have to move. More and more people are displaced because of climate change than ever before, and because of certain wars. And social media can help to explain that, add on the points where you look for the next piece or the next piece you read. So social media I see as an educational tool, as a cultural tool, and as a tool for people to give messaging to each other. And of course through Facebook and other forms, keeping in touch, and Instagram can be looking like a great magazine if people follow gardening or fashion and so on. So these are what I call the upside of it, which is really good, but the dark side is very frightening. But the other side is nothing but fun, and I see everything else around that.
Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for social media, right? I got my first internship working for the European Youth Forum in Brussels through social media. I saw the job advert. Being a young black girl from Newham, from one of the most poorest boroughs in UK, getting access to information was hard. Being from a single parent family who doesn't really understand the education system and opportunity. My mum did the best she could. My mum's the type of mother, right? She's the one that got me my internship with my MP. After I graduated from school, she went up to my MP and she was like, "My daughter will be coming to work in your office this summer. Can you just give us your email address to make that happen?" So my mum will try her hardest, but there's limits. There's limits to understanding how to navigate the cultural capital and the network of elite boys, right? Social media broke that for me. Social media allowed me to see there were opportunities outside of my area. Social media allowed me to get elected. At 23 years old, it gave me a platform to talk about issues that was important. Social media has allowed us to talk about testimonial movements like #MeToo and Black Lives Matter and police brutality in the US. Social media allows us to hold politicians to account, and about time that we did. Social media is an amazing tool. It allows us to find inspiration, to cultivate our identity. Some people have found love on Tinder. Like, it's an amazing place. but there are these glitches that are not allowing it to flourish as much as it can. And I think for us to keep praising on the positive, keep talking about how good it is, allows us to change the narrative, because you're right, if we keep talking about how negative it is and how bad it is, we end up changing the narrative, and we end up putting a lot of people off. And I think remember that social media and the internet is meant to be this leveler of information, this leveler of platforms, because there's people that would never have been able to earn the money that they're earning, but because they can be their authentic self online, they can make us laugh. That's amazing, and we should continue to praise that. And I think if we don't tackle online abuse and hate speech, it will continue to stifle freedom of expression and erode our democracy. If we don't become active bystanders, our online spaces will become hijacked and weaponized. That's why you're seeing people say, oh, I don't go on Twitter anymore. I don't go on Facebook. Oh, I made my Instagram private. And for some legitimate reasons, you may want to do that in terms of owning your platform, but you're being pushed out of the online public space. You wouldn't tell a woman not to walk down Oxford Street because she was going to be harassed or catcalled. And so we are seeing people being pushed out of the internet, and that needs to be hugely addressed.
Lina, social media allowed you to be yourself online. Has YouTube or other social platforms changed your life in a positive way?
정말 긍정적으로 바꿔줬다고 저는 생각을 해요. 제가 유튜브를
I think so. I think the social networks, social media platforms have been very positive. Because before I became a YouTuber, I didn't want to leave my house. But thanks to the social media, I was able to communicate with a large number of people. When I uploaded videos called I'm Not Pretty, I had very negative reactions. I was even tempted by, I had suicidal thoughts. But some anonymous people encouraged me. They gave me the strength to move on, and I benefited from the strength of social media. And I'm convinced that they have a very beneficial impact for a lot of people. But we're not all the same. We don't have the same experiences. Some people will miss the boat, will not be able to overcome that because they may be fragile, vulnerable, and they won't be able to sort of resist. Some people will make the wrong choices, and we have to be aware of the danger. It's tragic, and we have to stop all the attacks.
Story. I'm glad to hear that. It's already time for the last or the final remarks and recommendations from our speakers before we go to the room and give you the microphone. Shi, would you like to add something, what we've added? I think we all agree about the fact that it is time for tech companies to step up and to get involved fighting online hatred. What would you like to add to what we've just discussed?
Yeah, so at the back, just over there, I've put out some of our resources and links to our resources and what we offer. So please feel free to grab it. What I have here is our Fix the Glitch Toolkit, and it's how you can host a conversation about ending online gender-based violence in your community. You can do it at lunchtime, at work. You can do it with your kids over a week, playtime, bedtime. I don't have kids, as you can tell. I don't know what the right word is. You can do it with your girlfriends. You can do it with your lads as well. But it's about having a conversation about how we can all end online abuse. There's a guide for you as a facilitator to host that conversation about what online abuse is, the different tactics that we talked about. So trolling, hate speech, doxing, non-consensual photography, dead naming, really understanding different tactics. And then also there's a conversation about how we can be safer online. So looking at cybersecurity, looking at documenting, reporting abuse, because safety and digital citizenship starts with us. And then finally, it also looks at some of the solutions. So on a micro level, what you can do. So being an active bystander is so important, those 5 tips that we talked about. But also on a macro level, challenging MPs, challenging members of the House of Lords to take this as, to make this of interest of them, to get them more aware. Because again, if we look at the average age of an MP or a councillor, this is going to be something that is not for their generation. So it's really important for us to push them to understand. In terms of policy, the biggest thing that we can do is a levy on social media companies and invest in those 3 E's that I talked about. Education, public education, changing the narrative and the discourse to say that we are not tolerating hate speech on our public spaces anymore. Enforcement of the law, improving access to justice, and empowering civil society groups who are the experts in this. And this is cost neutral to government, because I know everyone's tight at the moment, right? This is cost neutral to the government. This can come from companies that generate billions of pounds every single year.
Mary.
Well, I think there may be an age difference outside, but certainly in my colleagues in the House of Lords and House of Commons and councillors and my colleagues politically and in social society around the world, we've been embracing social media from its inception. And we see it as a very important tool, as I said a few times, in educating everybody about campaigning, about issues, about voting. But on the dark side, I think it's really important that those who work in companies or who work in NGOs or whatever you do, give evidence when your governments or other organizations are calling inquiries into certain aspects, whether it's good or bad on social media, that you go along and give evidence, because every person, whether you send it written or whether you then are called, that counts and that is written, and that shows what really civil society feels about social media and how we can improve it, because it is here to stay. And we also know that in certain parts of the world where people are being educated in camps and so on, without social media, they would not know what's happening and what's happening to them. So it is a really, really important tool. And despite all that's bad about it, it can be improved. And that's what I look forward to in the future.
Rebecca, what are your recommendations as an academic?
Well, so I have lots of recommendations that I would give to a variety of different audiences. When I'm thinking about a really public audience like this, I want us to take it back to some of the most basic, to one of the most basic norms that's driving interactions on social media. That's the norm of reciprocity. And research has shown that this fundamental norm of reciprocity extends across cultures across the world. This is a norm that is understood and embraced in social interactions by everyone. What that means is that good will be met with good and bad will be met with bad on social media. And our responsibility then is to try and intervene in those moments when we're observing the negative, when we're observing the bad, and not respond with our natural inclination, which is to further the negativity, to attack those who are perpetuating the negativity and the abuse, but instead to respond with the opposite, with the positive, which will then itself breed further positive interactions. So if we really want to get to the place where we can focus on all the optimistic elements of social media, all the positive outcomes that it can have, and it can have so many, just as the other speakers noted, we need to take the responsibility to act and intervene with positive responses when we see the negative, when we see the abuse.
Lena, after your experience, what would your recommendations be, and what would you like to say to girls or women who were in the same position as you were before you started your YouTube videos? To girls or women who were in the same situation?
어,
In my case, well, before I started as a YouTuber, of course, I used social media, but I always thought I shouldn't accept the negative side of the social media. So I focused on what was positive about the social media. And I think this is a very important point for everybody. In other words, you shouldn't compare yourself to the others that are posting images that are good for them or very positive, but not focus on your self-image, because that could be negative for yourself when you don't have such a glamorous life. Because on Instagram and Facebook, you only see fragments of life. You cannot judge people on their images because they may not represent their daily life. Those who post images or pictures, they show the best of themselves, and you shouldn't compare yourselves to that. And you shouldn't be influenced by that comparison.
We've already addressed some issues that you've sent through Bcast, but maybe there are also people who would like to ask questions to our great panelists. Do it while you can. Any questions from the room? Yes, the lady over there. You will get a microphone. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting discussion. Could I ask Rebecca, what I found really interesting was when you were suggesting that you could kind of organize social media into kind of regions. What the suggested kind of reality of doing that?
Well, it wasn't that I was necessarily thinking about organizing it along regional lines, although that would be one possibility. We can think about this across lots of different cleavages, let's say. So it could be around different political lines in terms of actual geopolitical geographic areas, but it could be about topics of interest. It could be about larger communities. Today's panel is social media and identities. These groups could be organized more around identity spaces as well. What I think is important here, though, is because already Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are talking about moving to more of a system that's group-based, that's private message-based. And what I think is absolutely critical, if the platforms do move in that direction, is to maintain responsibility at the company level, right, to have mechanisms in place within those groups to ensure that abuse and harassment are not happening there. What I really worry about is that if we move to, let's say, a fundamentally WhatsApp model, right, that we're actually going to see these harms multiply, because there's no one within WhatsApp who's actually, observing, moderating, taking responsibility for looking for harms and protecting those who are being harmed. So these cannot be structured in a way that they're just completely private groups. We still have to view these as spaces for broader public discourse, but they're not just free for all, open to the entire world at all times spaces. They could be organized around lots of different topics and in lots of different ways, but with a fundamental commitment to building the positive discursive elements in those spaces.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any other questions? Yes, the lady over there. There's a microphone coming to you. Yep.
Hi, I have a question about algorithms, because we hear a lot about algorithms, and what I've read is that these algorithms are such that they put to the top negative content. And in fact, because they are for increasing engagement on these platforms, that these algorithms want negative content because it keeps people online longer. And I even read that when Facebook tried to change the news feed to make it more positive, their stock prices dropped immediately in a matter of moments. So what do you do to fight against this economic model that is the basis for all of what you're talking about? Because you want these platforms to be, you wanted, for example, investors to be involved, but if investors are dropping these companies when they change policies because these policies are therefore no longer good for the market, then I don't know how they can. What are the solutions? Or is this just a myth? Do these algorithms exist? Is this true?
I think that's a question for Rebecca, right?
Yeah, so I think there's, while that does remain true from a fairly global perspective, right? The principle itself is true. Basically, the algorithms are designed to encourage engagement. And negativity tends to get a lot of engagement, both positive and negative, both from those who are supporting the negativity and those who are trying to counter the negativity. It's just interesting. It's inherently dramatic. I think in recent years, most of the platforms have truly recognized the problem with this and have begun to reformulate their algorithms in ways that are not necessarily optimizing for negativity per se. The solutions that have been devised so far are far from perfect. We can't take, basically, there was an early model that really focused on the simple measures of engagement, such as the number of likes, the number of shares or retweets. Now, more sophisticated thinking looks at different forms of engagement with a post on social media. So the number of replies, but also the types, the content that's within those comments. It's still prioritizing engagement, but it can focus more on neutral or positive engagement than just the flaming, the shouting, right, the abusing others. It's far, far, far from perfect at this point. But I do see that most of the social media companies are recognizing that the problem is there and are reworking the algorithms accordingly.
Shay, you would like to add something?
Just on a quick broader level, I think it's about introducing more ethics when it comes to AI. So there is in the UK, and again, I don't want to do fake news, so I'm not going to lie to you, but there is and the Council of Europe as well have put out principles and ethics standards around creating of AI. So I think that's really important that we look at, is this going to do harm? Like, do we have everyone's best interests at heart? And trying to at least offset that a little bit with like the focus on profit. And I think it's also important to realize or remember who is in the room when these AI or these algorithms are being created. And actually, if we, going back to Mary's point around 50-50 or at least 30%, if we don't achieve that, then we've got algorithms already made for a particular type of person. I'll give you an example. I was invited, let's say the company's called Boogle, and I was invited to come and help do machine learning. And they were like, can you help this machine pick up sexist messages? I was like, sure, but you do realize that I'm also going to teach it to pick up racist messages. They're like, huh? Yeah, because I'm a black woman. So I'm not only just going to receive sexism, I'm also going to receive racism. And for Boogle, it really opened their eyes to intersectionality. They'd never seen it before. And it actually is for some of these companies, and I say it with such respect, I know one of them is your sponsor. It is really like treating them like children or foundational levels around identity and around society and around respect and around inclusion, because it's totally missing in these rooms. And Rebecca made a really good point. A lot of the solutions, a lot of the conversations around the engineering, the technical point. But when something breaks or when something bad happens, it's the policy people that go up and go speak in front of Houses of Commons or go and do the media. Actually, what we need to have is civil society group, academics talking to the engineers themselves, because they're the ones that look like, although don't represent society, that are basically making all the decisions. These platforms have trust and safety councils, and they're meant to be part of the formation of new products on the platform. So say, for example, when moments were created on Twitter, or when they changed favorites on Twitter from the star to like, this trust council is meant to be an advisory group, not binding, but meant to be part of that decision making, the rollout of that product. They get informed or consulted on at the end, when it's already been designed? How do we get that Trust and Safety Council, which is meant to be made up of young people, diverse groups, involved in the inception in the first place when it comes to creating these algorithms in the first place?
Thank you, Shi. Any more questions? Yes, the gentleman over there in the middle, the third row. Could you please stand up if you ask your question? Then you, yes, there will be a microphone there. Thank you.
So do I say standing up?
Yes, please.
So I think personally one of the advantages of having such a wide definition on free speech is the ability to criticize bad ideas that are so clearly bad. So I guess maybe my main question is, who would define what this hate speech or online abuse is, especially since social media goes across so many jurisdictions, so many users, and is there an issue that maybe everyone in this room would have a different definition? And like you see, like in America with Twitter, like a lot of people are getting mad saying they're banning conservative commentators, where some people say, hey, that's hate speech, and other people are saying that's just my political view. So I was wondering, who would come up with such a definition for like Facebook, who has billions of users?
That's an interesting question, because I think we also will see a clash of cultures. Of course, America or the United States has the First Amendment, very strict or very wide definition of the freedom of speech, which is completely different here in Europe, and also in Asia. There's a different view on what's exactly the freedom of speech. Maybe, Mary, you can answer this question about who is going to decide what is hatred, who is going to define the truth?
Well, that's quite difficult. Because of what we know, that America has a completely different idea on a whole number of issues, not in the present presidential and leadership, but when it comes to the issues of CEDAW, which is a agreement about how women issues should be dealt with, or about women at the peace table, all of these issues America does not sign up to. In the United Nations terms, or as we heard today in the New Zealand call, and wouldn't come to the table. So America is on one side, but has a great influence on social media around the world. You then have the Council of Europe's view on trying to work out what is hate crime, what is bullying, what is abuse, and trying to get 47 countries in Europe to sign up to that. And then you've got the Asian countries around ANZAC and so on, ASEAN. So it's really difficult about the policing on this. So we have to try to get some form of global self-regulation within the companies themselves, and with talking with their own countries, because we're not, I don't think, going to get a united 100% countries coming behind this. So we've got to try and find a code of conduct that is acceptable. And it must be acceptable, and it must take out forms of hate crime, bullying, encouraging people to harm themselves, and also the extreme right trying to influence moderation in all things.
She.
Big up Canada again. Canada have managed to do this. It was a fight, but and the US did pull out of the Human Rights Council 2 days before the session. But Canada have been able to, in their recommendation for a treaty around online violence and incidents of violence against women and girls, they were able to provide definitions and examples of it, and actually try and be as inclusive to different languages as possible, because they talk about internet-based crime as well. It doesn't just talk about social media, but to take into account smaller platforms that are used in different countries. So it is possible to have a broad framework around definitions of harm, and then leave it to member states to have tighter regulation, tighter examples. So Germany's on one side of where they've clearly defined hate speech offline, so it allows them to apply that online. Australia also have the e-safety commissioner, who looks at crime against children but also women, and that means that she has legislative power to really have oversight of trends of what is going on. In the UK, what we've done, based on the UN recommendation, is to say anything that is hate speech offline is now applied online. And that's how you start changing the narrative of seeing this online space as a different world. And I know this comes up quite a lot, and I have lots of conversations around freedom of expression, and I'm a big believer in it. But we have to understand that when somebody's spreading hate speech, they're also stifling somebody's freedom of expression. They're also stopping that person from being able to enter society and participate in public life. We've got stats showing the impact of the fear of online abuse on the next generation of girls who no longer want to stand in public life because they see the abuse that they get, that politicians get. Diane Abbott receives, she's the first black female MP, the Shadow Home Secretary in the UK. She receives the most abuse of all MPs. She skewed the research so much for Amnesty International. They took her out so they could look at other women. So women in public life and hate speech is a huge issue. So there's some things that are clearly hate speech that we're not tackling. And actually the conversation around freedom of expression and balancing it, which I have a lot of time for, dilutes and distracts us from the things that are concretely wrong. It's wrong to make a joke about rape of another MP, yet there is no legislation to give that MP any access to justice. You've got Cecilia Kyenge in Italy, the first black female MEP, and look at the harassment that she gets. There are things that are clearly hate speech, and this is also why it's very important to have the OECD, for us to stay in EU. Keep praying for us, guys, because actually this is where we can show solidarity and commonality amongst ourselves and say, look, hey America, jump on board. This is we are leading the way. Get in line.
Thank you, Say. We have time for one final question. Anyone in the room? Yes, the lady in the middle. Yes. Could you please stand up, then my colleagues can see you and give you the microphone. The lady from Canada.
Yes,
Canadian
thank you. It was mentioned earlier on the clash of cultures, and I want to ask this because, as mentioned, the US does have a lot of influence with social media. So I want to know if there's a lot of, if there's a database that tracks geographic areas or countries and how they may influence certain social media trends, and if that can help tackle these issues that we're seeing with abuse. If we see rising populism in the US, how does that, I see things that happen in the US and then a month later it happens in Canada too. So are there trends, is there research on this that puts all of this, again, this is probably for Rebecca, and then how can this, if there is this, will this affect how organizations like the OECD can create policies and tackle these issues on abuse and harassment?
So we're at the early stages of this work, but indeed a lot of researchers are really focused now on trying to understand the trends, how particular types of behavior and actions on social media might manifest in one particular geopolitical space and then are moved and used in other spaces. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that a lot of the negative tactics that we're seeing and that we're so concerned about today around misinformation, disinformation, abuse, harassment, and so on, actually were perfected in non-Western spaces, right? We became so concerned about disinformation following the presidential elections of 2016 in the US because it was the US. But they were not the originators of these types of campaigns. We saw them in Ukraine, in Georgia. We saw them being perfected in spaces where they simply weren't being monitored, right? Weren't getting the kind of global attention like something in the United States would be. So we need to pay attention to the researchers and the people who are being affected in those types of environments first and foremost, if we want to actually get ahead of the trends and prevent them from impacting Western democracies as well.
Mary, you would like to add
I'd
something?
just like to say that Rebecca is absolutely right, and people didn't take too much notice. Some of us were following what was happening in Ukraine and other countries, but we didn't. We thought it was just something there, and it wasn't until we had the American election then you saw those big tactics being used, and they're being used in other parts of the world. And it's our own faults, not some people in the audience, of course, but it is our own faults as people for not paying full attention to these things at the very beginning. That's when we always have to look what's happening, even how small it is. That's where the key is.
Very shortly.
Yes, there's something you said, and it reminds me of consumer power. And there is a stat to show that African American women have quite a lot of influence on Twitter. It's the biggest driver in terms of ads. They're the ones that create the hashtags, the GIFs, the memes. A lot of currency comes from Black Twitter. That's essentially what it's called, Black Twitter. The same for gay Twitter, the same for feminist Twitter. There's quite a lot of these groups. When we were talking about identities before, there exist that basically help Twitter get paid. And actually, if those groups were able to form, which is I like Rebecca's point, and see themselves as shareholders in a way and hold these companies to account, maybe that could potentially bypass governments that are reluctant to intervene for these companies.
Thank you very much. That wraps up this forum. You can leave your comments with the hashtag OECD forum. Only kind comments and no hate speech, please. I would like to thank our wonderful panel, Shei Akiwowo of Glitch, Baroness Mary Goody, Rebecca Trumbull of the University of Leiden, and all the way from South Korea, Lina Bei. Thank you very much for your attention. You're welcome.